Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. A recent event triggered this old memory. It's more that she doesn't work here. This happened many years ago. Think a year or two after the 2008 recession started. Setting as a retail drugstore chain, one open 24 hours a day. Despite being a big business, we're still feeling the effects of the recession. Everyone still has a job, but hours are being cut. I'm a shift supervisor working the closing 2:11 p.m. shift. The overnight supervisor and cashier have arrived. I'm in the office talking to the overnight supervisor when I get a call for a manager needed up front. I leave the office to handle the situation. For context, I'm female. So is the overnight supervisor. Both cashiers are male. Once I get up front, both cashiers are ringing customers up and tell me the complaining customer left. I notice there's a line and decide to help. As I'm ringing up a customer, let's call her Jane, a middle-aged man. Let's call him John, walks in and angrily tells me he needs to talk to me. I tell him no problem, let me finish with my customer. John starts anyway. John, your employee said she's going to call the police on me for having a disability placard, but I don't look disabled. John has an accent. On the surface, John does not look disabled. Me. Which one? Pointing to my two cashiers. John, a woman. She said it's her job to manage disabled parking. Jane begins to giggle at this point. Me. Whoever she was, she doesn't work for us. Johnny. She said she works for you. Me. Sir, there are only two females on duty at this moment. One of them being me. The other I was talking to in the office when you asked for a manager. If you'd like, I can call her out to the front and you can see if it was her. Now the shopping center does have security guards, however, last I checked, they are all male. John, I want to file a complaint about her and get her fired. Jane decides to chime in. Jane, sir, we're in the middle of a recession. People are losing jobs and getting their hours cut. You really think the store has a lot of money lying around for that meaningless position? The gears in John's head finally start to turn. John, she doesn't work for you. Me, no, she doesn't. John, can I kick her ass? Me, I have no say in it. John, I'm going to go kick her ass. Me, enjoy, waving goodbye. I finish ringing up Jane, who's still trying to hold back giggles. Jane, for a moment I thought, wow, you guys must be making a boatload of money to hire someone for that small job. About 15 minutes later, I clock out and head to my car. John's driving his car and rolls his window down. John, she's still driving around here. I'll kick her ass. I wave by. Don't know if John ever got the chance to kick her ass that night. I'm 44M. My mom is 67. Christmas is absolutely my mom's thing. She plans all year for a wider family holiday. My family, my brother with all our kids, etc., at their beach house. Now, I'll just say admittedly, until the last few years I used to seek a lot of approval from my mom. It used to annoy my ex-wife and my new wife, 4 years. Also had frustration about how much influence my mom had in my life. So in essence, I withdrew that behavior and stopped seeking her approval. After all, I'm an adult. This year has been a really tough year. My wife has had real MH struggles diagnosed this year with bipolar on top of other challenging conditions. I've spent a lot of time assisting her well-being, and sometimes when she has been at her deep lows, I've had my ex-wife take more than her share of care from my daughter, because quite honestly, it's better to separate her from a bipolar episode. She also has random undiagnosed pass-outs, say seizures. Fast forward to Christmas, we were expected to go to the beach house for 2 weeks with my daughter, 7, and my wife has been pretty good MH-wise, so we figured we should be okay. 2 days into our holiday, she passed out a seizure and it kicked her confidence. My mom is a heavy smoker and heavy drinker. We are both not smoking and not drinking. Wife is recovered alcoholic, and to avoid the constant ciggy smoke and avoid alcohol cravings, we often retreat to our own room. Like most years, the family holiday is more like a school camp. We all do everything together dictated by my mom's expectations. She has been planning this all year, of course. And to be honest, every year she gets her bee in a bonnet about something. Mostly it's a judgment in our parenting or that we are treating X better than our something judgmental like that. And we all have learned to just keep our mouths shut. After this pass-out incident, we are both wary. 4 days in, It's Christmas Day, and my wife and I decide to take our dog for a walk early before the beach is shut to dogs for the day and just have some alone time. I'm greeted with a snide remark about taking one dog for a walk and not taking the other dogs. So instead, our walk is joined by my dad and sister-in-law, so all dogs get a walk, and at this point, I'm just done with this crap. My wife is unhappy. My daughter misses her mom, and I am the one carrying it and wearing it all. This is supposed to be a holiday, and I have zero chance to fill my cup. So I organized a change in our flights at $900 to cut our holiday short to fly home 3 days later, 28th, so that we can all actually have our own place, space and pace to relax before returning to life in the new year. Not wanting to ruin Christmas, I waited until Boxing Day to inform the rest of the family. My mom initially said fine, but then began to ignore me, silent treatment. As the day progressed, we all went to the wharf for a swim and the silence continued. My wife asked her if she was okay, and my mom responded in anger. "I'm sick of the screwing lot of you, and you are very rude." And then she took one of the cars and went off. We came back to the holiday home, and it returned to her silence. A few hours later, my wife had another pass, out followed by probably the worst seizure I've seen. I informed my family that it was happening. It takes up to 30 minds for her to become responsive, and that I will spend the time making sure she is okay until she regains consciousness, still silent from my mom. She eventually came back and was very tired as what happened. Evening came by and we all went for an evening swim with the dogs, and my wife asked her nicely for a mature conversation, and she attempted to explain our situation, and it was returned with my mom calling her a selfish witch, and went on to call us neglectful parents because we often retreated to our own space due to the smoking and drinking. But my daughter was happy to just hang with her cousins. She went on and on about how she has taken me away from her. She accused her of manipulating me to get us to go home early, a decision we made together, and how much work she had done to plan Christmas, which she never accepts help, and it's always the same her way or no way anyway, and that once we leave, we are cut off from the family. Once again, she stormed off. It was then a very awkward and unsettled night's sleep. The next day, yesterday, my dad, brother, and I took the family boat out fishing, and my wife and sister-in-law were to take the kids to play mini-golf, my mom still being deadly silent. Both my wife and sister-in-law didn't want my mom to come along to mini-golf, as it's really not her thing, and the tension was killing everything. My wife bravely suggested to her that the tension was uncomfortable, and that they suggest she stay behind. My mom responded by screaming at my wife that she is sick of her being so rude and she should go get a car and piss off today, once again storms off and leaves. My wife sent me this update while at sea, so I once again shifted our flights to depart that evening, another $300, and as soon as I got back, we packed up our stuff and got a ride to the airport. I'm honestly messed up over this. I feel sorry for my dad who has to cop this behavior all the time and is powerless. I feel sorry for the rest of the family having to experience this tirade. For my daughter, niece, and nephew who have had to be around all this tension, but we had to make this call to look after ourselves before anyone else. And I have an obligation to my wife to protect her from any abuse. I honestly believe my mom feels entitled to my summer holiday time every year. So there I was, just minding my own business, doing a little retail therapy at the mall. You know, the usual weekend vibe. The fluorescent lights, the smell of cinnamon buns wafting from the food court. It was all so typical. Little did I know that my day was about to take a wild turn into the realm of entitled madness. I strutted out of the mall, bags in hand, feeling like I'd conquered the sales racks. As I approached my car, though, the air shifted. There was this commotion in the parking lot, and being the curious cat that I am, I had to check it out. Now picture this. A bunch of teenagers doing their TikTok dance routine. You know, the one where they look like they're trying to summon rain with their funky moves. It was all harmless fun until a giant Escalade, driven by what I can only describe as the human embodiment of entitlement, comes barreling in like it's auditioning for a Fast and Furious movie. The poor kid in the TikTok squad, let's call him Jaden, was in the middle of his hip, swaying masterpiece when the Escalade decided to join the party without an invite. Bam! Jaden's world went from TikTok stardom to a painful crash landing. The Escalade had given him a not-so-gentle love tap. I rushed over, dropping my shopping bags because priorities, right? Jaden's on the ground, clutching his arm, wincing in pain. And who emerges from the monstrous vehicle? Karen. Classic Karen haircut, oversized sunglasses, and a look on her face that screamed, "I can't be bothered." "Get up, you little faker." she spat at Jaden as if he'd just pulled off the most elaborate prank of the century. Now, I don't know what TikTok prank she's been watching, but breaking someone's arm for views seemed a bit extreme, even by internet standards. I couldn't just stand there, so I waded into the mess, throwing my hands up like, "What the heck, Karen?" I told her, "Lady, he's not faking it. Look at him, he's in agony." Karen, instead of showing an ounce of remorse, decides to play doctor. She kneels down, grabs Jaden's injured arm, and gives it a good yank. The poor kid screamed, and I swear I saw tears in his eyes. That's when I let my inner New Yorker out. "What is wrong with you, lady? You can't just run people over and then try to wrestle them back to health." But Karen wasn't having any of it. She looked at me like I was some annoying insect ruining her picnic. "Mind your own business, honey. Kids these days always pulling pranks for attention." I could feel my blood pressure rising, and I knew this situation needed some serious adulting. "No, this is my business. You hit him with your tank of a car, and now you're assaulting him. We're calling the cops." And that's exactly what I did. I pulled out my phone, hit up 911, and gave them the lowdown on Karen and her reckless escapade. Meanwhile, Karen's still standing there, probably rehearsing her "Do you know who I am?" speech. The cops roll up and Karen immediately goes into full diva mode. "Do you know who I am? This is ridiculous. I have places to be." The officer, no-nonsense type, responds, "Lady, it doesn't matter who you are. You hit someone, and now you're causing a scene. You're coming with us." Karen, undeterred, tries to charm her way out of it. "Look, officers, I'm a very important person. I can't be dealing with this nonsense." The cop, unimpressed, retorts, "Well, important person or not, you're still going to have to deal with the consequences of your actions." I stood there feeling a weird mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Karen's sous vide was being impounded. Dayton was on his way to the hospital, and justice, my friends, justice was being served. As they cuffed Karen, she looked at me with the kind of glare that could curdle milk. "You'll regret this." I just shrugged. Regret saving a kid from getting run over? Doubt it. So there we were, Karen getting escorted to the back seat of a police car like she was an extra in a crime drama. I felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief that all this chaos was unfolding in a mall parking lot. The cops were surprisingly chill, considering they were dealing with a Karen on a rampage. One of them came over to take my statement, and I spilled the whole tea. The officer nodded, gave me a pat on the back, and said, "Good job looking out for the kid. We'll handle it from here." Meanwhile, Karen, in the back of the police car, was still trying to play her entitled card. "You'll all pay for this. My lawyer will hear about it." The officer just shut the car door, muttering something about people and their lawyers. Classic Karen move, right? Always threatening with legal action like it's the ultimate trump card. As the scene was starting to wind down, I took a moment to check on Jaden. His friends were gathered around him, probably still in shock from the whole ordeal. The poor guy was pale, but he managed a weak smile when he saw me. "Thanks for stepping in," he said, his voice strained. "No problem, dude. No one messes with my fellow TikTokers," I replied, trying to lighten the mood. He chuckled, wincing a bit. "Guess this is my most dramatic TikTok yet." I grinned. "You'll get 1 million views for sure. When Karen met TikTok, it's a hit already." Jaden's friends started laughing, and the tension in the air began to dissipate. It was like we were all collectively saying, "Screw you, Karen. We're not letting you ruin our vibe." The ambulance arrived to take Jaden to the hospital, and I promised to swing by later to check on him. As they loaded him into the ambulance, he threw up a peace sign, a true TikTok trooper even in the face of adversity. With the immediate trauma over, I turned my attention back to the cops. Karen was still throwing a tantrum, yelling something about being late for a spa appointment. The officer, clearly done with her antics, just gave me a knowing look. "Thanks again for your help, ma'am. We've dealt with our fair share of entitled folks, but this one takes the cake." I chuckled. "Tell me about it. Glad I could be of service." The officer tipped his hat, which felt like a move straight out of an old Western. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. This incident blew up in March 2021, in the middle of lockdowns and stuff. It's a story about someone whose ambition was bigger than their ethics and the law, and it comes back to bite them. At the time, I was working as a manager in a mid-sized business. While I was there, I was assigned a new member to my team. I'll call her Evil. Evil was in her mid-20s and was pretty fresh out of college. She was the kind of person who could talk your ear off about all of her ideas and plans and what she was working on, but never really seemed to have anything to show for it. When I talked to her about clients complaining that she wasn't getting back to them, she would always have an excuse about how difficult they were, how snowed under she was, and how she had written an email, but must have gotten lost in spam, so on and so forth. Basically never her fault. It got to the point where after one of our monthly meetings, I called her in and explained that if she couldn't get her tasks done, she needed to let us know so we could help delegate resources to make sure things weren't slipping through the cracks. I'll admit, I was pretty direct. Her performance was impacting the whole team, and my job was literally to keep the team on track. I get that people can be under pressure, that there can be stuff going on at home which impacts work, and that sometimes people need a bit of help. But if every time I ask about a project you say yep, everything's good, I've got it under control, and then it all falls apart, and your only response is to blame the client, then we have a problem. I explained that I wasn't going to start formal performance management or anything like that, but from now on I'd like her to check in with me on Monday mornings for 10 minutes to go over objectives for the week and to check if she needed support with any of her clients. I know it isn't fun to be micromanaged, so I tried to keep these check-ins short and mostly just offer assistance on stuff. She clearly hated my guts, though, and apparently was hatching her own revenge. Now, part of my role included use of a purchasing card, which wasn't in my name, but I had access to. I was given the card to basically make small purchases for the office or spend up to $500 on clients. The card was kept in an office I shared with another team manager, where we both could access it when we needed it. One day I get a call from accounts asking about a few abnormal purchases on the card, a Photoshop subscription, a couple of Uber Eats orders, an HBO subscription, etc. I say I don't know anything about them, and they should check with the other team manager. Apparently the other team manager didn't know anything about them either because after the weekend I got called into the big boss's office. After my colleague and I had denied involvement, accounts had started calling Adobe and Uber and stuff to find out where the transactions were coming from. They said that not only were the accounts in my name, they were registered to an email address with my name in it too. I can't describe what it felt like to be in that meeting. I felt physically sick. I couldn't work out what was happening. I was so shocked I didn't know what to say. I felt like I was about to get fired and I couldn't understand how that was even possible. The director was going on about how access to the card was a privilege and that I had signed an agreement about appropriate use and so on and so forth. I denied that I had been using it inappropriately, and the boss listened, but I could tell he wasn't that convinced. To be honest, in my head I was gaslighting myself and worrying that I had somehow saved the card in Google and maybe my wife had been accidentally using it or something. It was terrible, and I found myself apologizing and saying I don't know how this happened. I assure you that I know that none of those expenses are appropriate uses of company funds. There must have been some kind of mistake. Can I please have the details and look into it, etc. When I finally got out of that office, job still intact, well, barely, evil was waiting for me at my office door. She was grinning from ear to ear and sweetly explained she'd been waiting for our morning meeting. I told her something had come up and we'd do the meeting tomorrow, and she said, "Oh, will you be in tomorrow?" Confused, since I didn't know I was in a revenge threat at the time, I just replied, "Yes. Why would I not be in tomorrow?" And she just sipped her tea and said, "Oh," no reason, turned around and went back to her desk. Something felt off, but I was still worrying about what had happened with the boss, so I spent the next couple of hours calling my wife, calling Adobe and doing the same legwork that accounts had done. It became very obvious that someone had been using my name and the company card to spend a bunch of money online. Had I been hacked or something? Personal info on the dark web and these hackers just really wanted Photoshop and Wendy's delivered? It was the Uber Eats that was her undoing. After getting on the phone and talking through what had gone on, and obviously giving my name for the account and everything, the fellow on the phone told me where the food had been delivered. It was in our city, which made me rule out straight away any notion of my data being sold online or something. Now I was suspicious and pissed. I don't like to think the worst of people, but now I was. Listening to my gut, I pulled up Evil's employee information and checked her address. I pulled it up on Google Maps, dropped a pin on her place, and then looked for the address Uber Eats had given me. It was the corner of her effing block. I was furious. When she left work for the day, I got IT to give me access to her laptop. There were some things she had been smart about. The IP address she had been using was the office, which would have tied back to me. She had even had the food delivered to a different address. She had even made a fake email address, but saving her passwords on a work computer was a mistake. I called the boss that night and explained what I had found, and kept the it guy with me to support the fact that I hadn't just logged into her computer and made it all up. The next day, the boss called her into the office and fired her so bad there were red trucks lining up outside the building. When she teary-eyed left his office, I made sure I was standing in the hall sipping a cup of tea. It had gotten cold while I waited for her, but still tasted sweet. I hope she went home that night because if she did, she would have received some nice goodbye Wendy's delivered by Uber Eats, paid for on my personal card, of course. Revenge and justice can be the same thing, right? In the end, she was fired. The boss apologized and we were on good terms when I left in October for a new gig. To preface, I live in a country that employs a large foreign expat workforce in pretty much every industry and in all levels. For someone to move here for work, they have to be sponsored by a company or the individual that's employing them. I own and operate a small restaurant business here and employ more than a handful of foreigners as servers, cleaners, kitchen staff, drivers, etc. So, here's the story. I was lounging on my couch enjoying the last of my weekend one day when I got a call telling me that one of our sponsored employees, a server, let's call her Janice, was picked up for indecent exposure essentially. Long story short, she was caught hooking up with a guy in a private booth at a local restaurant. Basically, the police walked in on them whilst engaged in some seriously heavy petting. They were fully clothed, but the guy she was with, or practically on top of I should say, has his junk out. Turns out he works at the restaurant 2 doors down from where she worked. After a bit of chastising and threatening to escalate the situation and have them deported to sufficiently scare their senses back into them, they let them go, but not before signing a pledge-type document promising to never repeat the offense, or else. A slap on the wrist, basically, and everyone got to go home, but it doesn't end there. That night, something clicked in my brain, and I had the thought, how and why did the police find them in a private booth in the back of a restaurant before the restaurant's own staff did? So I called the restaurant the next day. I thought maybe they called the police on them immediately for some reason. Or maybe the couple got belligerent when staff asked them to stop. Turns out the staff didn't notice a thing. In fact, up until that day, the police had never been to that restaurant before. And when they did, they simply walked in, went straight to the back booths where the two were sat and busted right in. I realized this meant that someone must have seen them and called the cops on them point blank. The question was who? I decided to speak to Janice. I wanted to speak to her anyway that day, both to check in and get her version of the situation. I also gave her the, you did something stupid chat and reassured her that she's keeping her job. I also wanted to ask her who she thought called her in. Without hesitation, she said it had to be Sami, who was one of our drivers. Why do you think it was Sami? I asked. He's the one that dropped me off at the restaurant that day. He might have seen my friend walk in right after me and called the police on us. She said, I knew the part of him dropping her off was true, that literally his job and her only free mode of transport. Well, that sounds a bit drastic. Why would he do that, even if he had seen you do anything? I asked. She claimed it was because he was jealous. He was really into her apparently and kept trying to get her into bed. She said, what genuinely pissed me off was when she told me that he actually tried to force himself on her once and she fought him off, and that he hasn't tried or even said anything since other than being very short and curt with her. My immediate response was, why on earth would you not tell me or one of your managers right away? She said she had dealt with it her way, and it stopped. Plus, she didn't want anybody to get fired on her account, and she didn't want any interaction with the authorities, so she decided not to make a big deal out of it in the first place. She also declined to press formal charges against him, which I advised her to do. Her declining infuriated me even more. This guy was going to get off scot-free. Now, clearly, I was about to fire Sami, but in my mind, that wasn't enough. For someone to attempt to rape a person, basically, and not get in trouble for it. Not okay with me, but it seemed like it was something I had to live with. Obviously, my next conversation of the day was with Sami. My intent was to confront him with the accusations. I called him into my office. I didn't really know where to start, so I went with, obviously you've heard about what happened to Janice this weekend? He stepped in it right away, heard about it. Came the unexpectedly proud response from a proud AF and positively beaming Sami. I called it in, and this is where it started to get super satisfying. You see, for a couple of years since I met Sami, every now and then he would pull out and show us all pictures of his wife who was back home living with his mother. She was younger than him and quite beautiful, but sadly barren, which is apparently why she settled with an older fart like him. He was so proud of how pretty she was. He was also a devout religious man, or so he claimed. So I asked him why I called the police. He came back with after I dropped her off, I waited to see who she was meeting because she's a troublemaker woman. When I saw the man walk in after her, I called police because I know him and he is married, and this is against the laws of God and man. I'm smiling now. I knew I got him. Why do that instead of calling your direct manager or even me? And before even seeing for yourself what they were doing exactly at that, why make it my problem and the company's problem what she does in her own time? Silence. Head down counting his shoes. Sami, I know why. I know what you did. Janice just told me. I'm disgusted by you and sorry that we hired you. He had the audacity to mumble, I only tried once, sir. I almost slapped him. Anyways, I fired him, handed him a one-way ticket home, which was in 4 hours, and told him to GTFO. This is where I get my not-so-petty revenge. I had his house phone number saved somewhere from we hired him. It was on his CV. I knew that because I called him there to interview him before we first hired him. I waited until his flight took off and dialed the number. I assumed either his mother or wife would answer the call, but I was wishing for the latter. I got my wish. Hello, Mrs. Sami. I'm your husband's employer. Well, his former employer anyway. Just so you know, I fired him a few hours ago and he's on a flight home as we speak. His flight number is X. He will be arriving at Z. Just so you are aware, I was forced to fire him because he attempted to rape a fellow employee half his age. I'm sorry, I said, and promptly hung up, but not before hearing her gasping in shock. As the title says, last week I kicked what I thought was a good friend out of my house because I can no longer handle her antics. Just want to write it here just to de-stress and deal with the grief of losing a friend. Kendall, 25F, and I met in university in 2016. We studied different majors, but were from the same department, so we shared many classes together and bonded over our passion for gaming and memes. Upon graduation, Kendall moved back to her hometown due to COVID and found a job there. We kept in touch online through Instagram. About 3 years later, Kendall told me she found a better-paying job in the city, so she's planning to move out from her parents' place. When I asked her about her plans on her accommodations, she replied with, "That's the thing. I was going to ask if you have an extra bedroom that I could move into." For context, I have inherited an apartment from my late grandfather, which is a nice 3-bedroom, 2-bath near the city center last January, and I currently live alone there since it is closer to my workplace, and it has all the convenience of public transport. After some thinking, I thought that there's no harm in living with Kendall since I considered us as close friends. We discussed the terms and awked the rent. A week later, Kendall moved into my apartment. It was great at first. My home felt more lively than usual, and the thought of going home to a close friend warmed my heart and gave me a sense of security. Things were okay for a while, and then crap goes downhill super quick. Kendall started complaining about many things at home, about her work, her savings, and how she feels homesick. At first, I was very accommodating, thinking maybe she just needs time to get used to the city life. I offered as much help as I can, even to the point of if she's low on money, I don't mind voiding a month's rent if it meant I could help her to achieve financial stability. I taught her how I save money, how I live off my then low salary with several commitments like my car, my dog, and a student loan. I grew up where my parents expected me to be independent, so I told her things I do when I'm low on cash, how to get freelance jobs, etc. But she always seems to have excuses for every suggestion I have. Finding a freelance job is too hard, or how she couldn't let go of her premium junk food, that she isn't willing to cook or meal prep, and I eventually decided to leave it as it is. And after 2 months of living together, I realized Kendall started treating me as some kind of competition. She would constantly ask me things like, how much money I make a month, how many job hoppings did that take? Anything that she thinks she's better than me, she'll definitely pop that question. She boasts about how she is loyal to her shitty paying company, and how I would never be able to move up the corporate ladder as she called me an industry frog. She once snooped my savings balance and asked that of did I have so much saved up with commitments, etc. Mind you, she didn't have a lot of commitments since her parents paid off her student loans and fully paid off a brand new car for her. And maybe I should stop collecting rent from her. I got mad and told her if she isn't happy living with me, maybe she should move out. Cue crocodile tears as she said it was a joke. I didn't have to take her seriously. She begged for forgiveness and promised to never snoop my personal items and details again. I let it go once, but she kept bringing things up like, well, you have the cash and a credit card every time I told her I would rather stay home because I no longer have the budget to go out and have fun. Comments like these became more frequent when I got a new job 6 months ago. On top of that, she doesn't clean up after herself, tries to flirt with my boyfriend, and at times parked in my parking space, when our initial agreement was that she has to find her own parking space if she's moving in with her own car because my apartment only has one parking lot per unit. The straw that broke the camel's back was when I caught her kicking my dog in his abdomen when I got home from work. I yelled at her and rushed to check my dog. Luckily, he was fine, but I still rushed him to the vet for safety measures. I got home and she sneered that it was just a dog, and as a friend, I shouldn't treat her like that. I asked why she'd kicked my dog, and she didn't answer me. She shrugged and tried to escape into her room. At this point, it was already about a year since Kendall moved in with me. I lost my cool and told her off, bringing up her problems and how I tried to be nice and accommodating. Then I told her I'm giving her a week to move out, and that from then on, I'd rather we keep our relationship casual or we don't ever talk at all. Kendall cried and begged me to not kick her out, but soon it turned into her screaming back at me, calling me a bad friend because apparently, in her words, I didn't tell her off on how badly she was behaving. Like, what the fuck? There was a lot of back and forth, which I don't remember what I said, but I remember eventually calling her an entitled brat. She cried again, saying it was uncalled for, and stormed off to her room. The next day, I was bombarded with texts from other unifriends, some calling me selfish and others sympathized with me. Apparently, Kendall posted our argument on Facebook and Instagram, painting me to be the bad guy. I was upset at first, but I decided that after Kendall moved out, we would no longer be friends, as well as those who took her side of the story and condemned me. Last week, Kendall left, and I have changed the locks on my apartment. I curled up in bed and cried myself out, probably from the sadness of losing a friend, or maybe I am finally letting out all the frustrations. I am definitely still grieving about this loss of a friend, as I've had many good times with Kendall. For now, I want to focus on myself, and hopefully I eventually get over this. Edit. The whole teasing that I have more money than Kendall gotten worse when I told her I was given an offer by an MNC as a senior designer, and I disclosed to her the offered salary, as we always did, like I know how much she earns too, which was about 50 more than hers. That was dumb on my part. I now understand why my parents told me to never discuss salaries the moment I started working. Update. Hello everyone, I'm here with some updates about me and my doggo, as well as my now ex-friend Kendall. Let's start off with an update about myself. I've been doing well, and surprisingly, as some of you mentioned previously, I had gotten over the loss of this friendship rather quickly. My boyfriend planned a trip to a pet-friendly beachfront hotel, and I spent a few days with just my boyfriend and doggo. We played in the seawater, and I watched my dog play in the sand. Overall, had a great time, and we even had grilled fish together while watching the sunset. Doggo had a deboned fish fillet. I'm also grateful for my friends who stood by my side regarding this issue. They check in on me from time to time and send me funny content to watch during my free time. Some of them even told me their stories about Kendall and their discontentment with her behavior, which I will list some below. Friend A. Kendall ridiculed Friend A several times because Friend A earned less than Kendall despite he has worked a year longer than Kendall. Friend B, Kendall Trash, talked Friend B's company via Instagram just because Kendall flunked her interview with said company with flying colors. Friend C, Kendall always demands Friend C to be her personal driver during our college days. If Friend C refuses, Kendall will guilt trip her. Friend D ruined Friend D's assignment by pranking him. She actually formatted his laptop when the project was due in 2 weeks. When confronted, all Kendall said was oopsies. There are many more, but these are the more icky ones I've heard from my friends. And now with that out of the way, here is today's main course. After I kicked Kendall out of my house, one of my uni friends, let's call her Ann, stood by Kendall's version of events and allowed Kendall's version of events and allowed Kendall to move in with her instead. Ann called me out of the blue this afternoon, and her first question to me was, "How on earth did you manage to put up with Kendall for a year?" She's driving me crazy. Long story short, whatever Kendall did when she's living with me, she now does it to Ann. Snooping Ann's personal items, leaving dirty laundry around, generally being a prick in the butt. Ann told me she's planning to force Kendall out of her house, too. I didn't comment much since Ann was among those who called me a cruel person, but now it has come back to bite her. But wait, that's not all, according to Ann. Kendall lost her job because she tried to ask for a 100 increment and assaulted her supervisor when the increment request was turned down 2 weeks ago. She was immediately escorted out of the office building by security, and she just texted me 20 minutes ago saying she needed a favor from me, that she wants a job at my workplace. I replied stating there isn't any vacancy. To be honest, even if there is, I wouldn't hire her. So yeah, I hope this is the last time I will hear from Kendall, and I'll only update if somehow something interesting happened that involves Kendall. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences, opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.